This Lunchbox session is being presented by the 4 AGIT Conference Scholarship holders who attended the 2023 World Hydrogen Summit and exhibition in May this year. It was held in the Netherlands. The summit is the world's largest hydrogen event and is dedicated to global hydrogen advancement. It's known to be one of the leading global platforms where hydrogen business gets done. Has over 8,000 visitors, 1,600 delegates, 350 exhibitors and 50 sponsors. So I can only imagine how amazing that was. So without further ado, I would like to welcome our 4 scholarship holders. They are Emelina Baker from AGIG, Caitlin Grant, Advisian, Karina Nixon, GPA Engineering, and Parul Trangi from AusNet Services. Karina, you're going to kick us off.
Thanks, Jen. So first, we'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land that everyone is tuning in from today. We recognise them as the custodians and recognise any other people or families with connections to these lands. We acknowledge that and respect their continuing culture and the contribution they make to our life, our cities and our regions. As we engage in this lunchbox, let us remember the significance of this acknowledgement of country, not only as a mere formality, but as a commitment of reconciliation, respect and celebration of diversity. And if you're still making up your mind about the decision on the 14th of October, which I think a lot of us will be in Perth for the APGA convention, I would recommend ignoring everything else going on in the media and simply reading the Daily Auss's 10 arguments for and against, which is the best summary and non-biased account I have found on the topic. So firstly, a huge thank you to Jen and the AGIT and our companies for supporting us to head over to Rotterdam at the World Hydrogen Summit. We'd also like to give a shout out to Brett and Linda from Gemina and Craig and Vikram for AGIG, who looked after us while we were over there and made us feel like a big happy family representing the Australian gas industry. Today, we will be talking to you about our experience at the summit. On the first day, we went to the Port of Rotterdam on a site tour, and on days 2 and 3, we were at the summit and exhibition. Each of us will take a turn kind of sharing some lessons and some key insights that we had throughout the summit, and Em at the end will be sharing her extended trip, which she was lucky enough to see some other cool stuff happening on that side of the world as well. So I'm Karina Nixon. I'm a project engineer at GPA Engineering. I work on a very diverse amount of hydrogen projects here at GPA, and I had a really great time over in Rotterdam. It was really exciting to be able to travel for the first time in a few years and really just see what the rest of the world have been up to while we've all been working from home. Parul, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Karina. Hi, everyone. Parul Tangri, the Operations and Maintenance Contracts Manager here at AusNet Services. So part of my day-to-day, I look after the end-to-end operations and maintenance across our gas sub-transmission and distribution asset base that AusNet owned through Central and Western Victoria. And I'm very fortunate enough to sort of receive the scholarship offered by the Australian Gas Industry Trust to sort of offer me to attend this conference amongst the 4 amazing women and also be part of the Australian delegation. It was truly like a very illuminating experience for me and definitely a career highlight. To not having been traveled to Europe before, it was no better opportunity to do that, to having to do as part of attending a summit. So yeah, it was definitely a career highlight for me. And now I'll pass it on to Emelina to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Parul. Emelina Baker, Strategic Advisor, Australian Gas Infrastructure Group. So I've been working in this role now, jumped over from working almost a decade in renewable electricity, jumping across to renewable gas has been a real eye-opener to what we're doing in the industry here as well. So it was a real honour to be awarded the scholarship through AGIT, and it was such an amazing opportunity to meet and network with some of the industry leaders from around the world. So really appreciative of that. Thank you. Caitlin?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Caitlin. I'm a graduate process engineer / quasi-energy consultant at Advisian. I've been in my role for a year and a half now, so it was a pretty cool opportunity to be able to go to Rotterdam to one of the world's biggest hydrogen conference only just a year into my career. The sort of projects I work on are feasibility studies and concept studies on hydrogen solutions and its derivatives. Recently, I've been doing some interesting work on methanol, so it was just really great to be able to go to this conference and see what the rest of the world was doing, as Karina said. Might move on to the next slides. So the first day of the conference, we got to do a site tour of the Port of Rotterdam, which I thought I would run through because it was a pretty cool way to kick it off. So you can see we've got a photo of the test rig for Halide X, which was the world's largest wind turbine in 2021 at 12 megawatts. This has been beaten by China, which now has a 16 megawatt wind turbine, but it's pretty cool to see the scale of it. You can also see below there's pics of wind turbines in construction on an offshore, on a floating platform. And there was even a human-made beach, which is not as good as Australians' beaches, but it was, you can see some wind turbines in the background, so it was good energy infrastructure there. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is a bit of a map that showed our route through the Port of Rotterdam. There were 25 hydrogen projects under development in this area. A lot of them were just empty blocks of land, so it was them being pointed out and a bit of a marketing spiel from those companies to say what amazing things they were developing in that area. But it was still pretty cool to see, and Port of Rotterdam has a net zero ambition by 2050, and they've got an interesting green and digital corridor trade with Singapore because that's quite a big trade route. And they're focusing on biofuels, biogases, and also hydrogen and its derivatives. And interestingly, they have a digital trade lane, so they're trying to optimise maritime efficiency and safety and the transparent flow of goods. So both the new technology and also utilising and leveraging the digital side. Next slide, please. And I just thought I'd focus on two sites that we saw. So the Onyx Power Station is not super hydrogen related, but it is one of the world's cleanest and most efficient coal-fired power station. It was built in 2015 and it has to close by 2030 due to a ban on coal-fired power stations that the Netherlands government has put in place. And Onyx want to build a 1.2 gigawatt blue hydrogen project at that site to sort of keep it going. So that was interesting. We also had a presentation from ACE Terminal, who are looking at developing their ammonia business and developing an ammonia cracking as well on site. So you can see in that picture, we've got the presentation from the ACE representative and that sort of concept image of what the port will look like. So it was pretty cool to see what the hydrogen industry could potentially look like in future. I think now we can move on to the next slide, and we're going to talk about the summit and exhibition itself on day 2 and 3, and we've got some pictures here. So we had summit talks where we had panel events with CEOs, and that was quite an interesting discussion. And then you can see a photo of the Austrade stand where lots of networking took place. So you can see that's pretty busy, and it was a great opportunity to meet all sorts of people. But I might pass on to Parul to discuss some key lessons and insights learnt.
Thanks, Caitlin. Yeah, so as touched on by Caitlin, the World Hydrogen Summit was 3 full days and nights packed with networking, learning, and multiple productive and insightful conversations across, as Jen pointed out, it was one of the biggest event with more than 2,000 companies attending and more than 11,000 attendees. So you can only imagine the scale of the conversations we were having, and just being in a room in the presence of all these global leaders across the hydrogen value chain and these visionaries explaining and showcasing their very cool technology that's happening across the globe, ranging from manufacturers, research producers, distributors, off-takers, etc. List goes on. So day 1 was the site tour, but day 2 and 3 were more focused on the summit and the exhibition. So the way the summit was panned out, it was the panel and presentation in the main hall. And then we had the hydrogen tech series happening concurrently, and whilst the summit and exhibition and a convention site setting happening all at the same time. So you can only imagine we had to be very organised and very intentional with our times in terms of picking and in what sessions we wanted to hear and what companies we wanted to target to grasp as much as and sort of tickle on our curious bean as well to learn in as much information as we could. So some of the one of the biggest ones was for me and the others was to learn about the key hydrogen projects that's been happening across the nation. It was very interesting for me personally to sort of know about that there were more than 100 projects in completion, either completed or in development, from ranging from planning to commercial export and production across the whole nation, and how Australia was set to sort of become the second largest net exporter for low emission hydrogen by 2030 and the largest by 2050. And that accounted for like almost up to $300 billion worth of investment in different renewable hydrogen projects across the nation, starting from early stage research project to development projects and studies, and which representing about 40% of the renewable hydrogen projects across the globe. So this was this kind of highlighted that there were projects across, hydrogen refueling, hydrogen trucks, hydrogen for producing green ammonia, hydrogen for use of limonite, refining, gas blending, remote power, and the list goes on. So this was a little snippet, and it does not cover all the projects that are in scale and development at the moment, but it kind of highlighted that how Australia's set itself, and it's not behind the eight ball, to sort of be a major player in establishing hydrogen economy towards our green future landscape. Next slide, please. Talking further into some of the key takeaways and learnings from the various presentations, and also the different chats that we had across the summit and exhibition. The first one that I had was emphasised on the certainty of hydrogen, that there was no silver bullet to the energy transition. We can't just electrify everything, and how hydrogen had a very vital role to play in the energy mix, particularly the hard-to-abate industries. And by hard-to-abate industries was referred to shipping, aviation, steel manufacturing, etc. So witnessing remarkable advancements in the electrolysis technology, fuel cell efficiencies, hydrogen storage solutions, kind of reaffirmed hydrogen is no longer a question mark, but a very definitive solution. And we'll be touching further on these new technologies through the course of this presentation later on. Thinking big and acting small. So this was a statement that was mentioned by Olivia Breese, Senior VP at ROTTERDAM, which is one of the leading global green energy companies. And by this statement, she wanted to emphasize the importance of ambitious visions and goals, and how we need to balance that with incremental steps and tangible actions. Like amidst, we have all these ambitious targets of reaching big gigawatt scale projects worldwide. There was an important, crucial need for a very realistic pathway from current multi-megawatt to this multi-gigawatt scale, and how we find that balance between the grand ambitions and practical implementation. Integrated economy is essential, but currently nebulous. That was another sort of recurring theme of integrated economy that was sort of shared across, particularly on the day one of the summit, which kind of emphasized that the importance of collaboration and alignment across all the different sectors of the value chain. And also, it was a big learning and realization for the individual companies having all these ambitious targets to really align with the sectors that play a key part in their operations, and how a clear and very overarching policy framework was necessary to provide the consistent guideline to enable synchronized progress through the industry. Prioritizing safety at all cost. So that was a very reiterated message that was passed on, that safety measures and protocols were essential enablers for the continued innovation and investments across the sector, as one single safety incident has the potential to derail the progress of the industries thus far. Require large amount of storage before we can vector the process of large-scale hydrogen production. So that was a statement passed on one of the channels, one of the presentations focused on storage, transport, and distribution. And it kind of relayed the messaging across that as much as significant investment that's been happening across in the generation and production space, there's nowhere near enough in the storage, transport, and distribution space. And it kind of highlighted that the green energy production is limited without efficient means to store and effectively deliver hydrogen to end users. And some of the challenges that were discussed across the official days of the summit was the 3A's challenges, and the 3A standing for affordability, accessibility, and availability. And these were the 3 A's that were highlighted as challenges, continuing particularly with the new technologies, as there's a vast sort of scope of new technologies out there, ranging from fuel cells to electrolysis to storage, but it was highlighted that how it remains a challenge to select which technology is best suitable, feeding back into the 3A's. Then the other one was the striking the balance of demand and supply. And that was a very interesting piece that I found by having those conversations across in the exhibition, was to sort of how it was very important to strike the balance of demand versus supply. As an example, on one side of the spectrum, talking to ThyssenKrupp, which is the global electrolyzer manufacturer and supplier, how they sort of pointed out that there was more than enough demand and they had some constraints around the supply of the materials making up the electrolyzers. But on the other end of the spectrum, talking to Air Liquide, how they highlighted that they didn't have enough demand in terms of not a lot of uptake from the off-takers and the end users, but they have more than enough supply and import and mobility solutions. And last but not the least, it was highlighted that there's a massive, there is a key skill gap, not only from the plant operators, but also to the leadership across the board that needs to be highlighted and brought onto the journey for this hydrogen economy. So essentially, to sort of wrap this up on my end, was that the size of the Australian delegation amongst the Australian coffee and the wine was the talk of the town across the whole summit. People actually told me that they thought Australia wasn't interested in the net zero, but given the previous government's policy position, but they were really surprised how large-scale representation we had on all the projects that we saw in the forum. And just being in presence made me think that Australia is really not behind the 8 ball and we're all at the early stage of development, just it's a matter of scale. So that was some of my key takeaways. Now I'll pass it on to Emelina. Sorry, Karina.
Yeah.
Little blip there.
Awesome. So I'm going to speak to everyone about the funding structures that were discussed at the World Hydrogen Summit. And I think I haven't had too much exposure to funding structures, but the nature of the summit drew the attention of a lot of investment and a lot of bankers and a lot of those type of people. So a lot of people were asking the question, how much is this going to cost? And it was a very hot topic of conversation throughout the entire summit. So these are some of my favorite quotes, and I love quotes because they tell stories. And the first one is that we need projects that work without subsidy. And I think this one speaks to itself. And I actually strongly urge us to rethink our commitments on this, because some of the most successful hydrogen projects, not only in the world, but also the ones here in Australia, are those that are just getting on with it. They have already established clear offtake agreements. And one that I can think of off the top of my head is the Sumitomo and Rio Tinto one in Gladstone, where the hydrogen is just going straight to the alumina refinery. Number 2, it will eventually become competitive, but it does need help now. Don't exclude colours or pathways. It was really eye-opening and incredibly interesting that people aren't talking about the rainbow of hydrogen anymore. It was actually far more common to hear the words carbon neutral or low carbon hydrogen. And I think this opens up huge opportunities to allow for the quick scale up of the supply chain, especially in a lot of the funding incentives where it's very obviously shown that companies are being rewarded for green hydrogen projects and they are getting less funding for low carbon hydrogen projects. Number 3, we need a fundamental shift about everything that has been considered economically rewarding. And it's because we simply didn't care about the environment enough. So it's great to hear that some of the conversation wasn't just about how we make money. It ultimately was recognised that companies investing have probably made most of their money hurting the environment. And the sad reality is that it's time to maybe lose some of that money so that we can save it. It's the timeless quote of, if not now, then when, and if not us, then who? And finally, my favorite quote from the entire summit, which was, let's make difficult decisions where everything's not in place and it's time to make mistakes. So this came from the leader of the Ørsted flagship 1E methanol project. And she said openly within the first hour of the summit that the standards for their project were not in place. It wasn't economically viable, but they figured screw it and chose to consume the risk. Because at the end of the day, they knew if they didn't start now and were prepared to lose money, then there was no way that they were going to end up competitive in the long term. Whenever someone asks me about what I learned from this conference, I always come back to this final quote because I think it's the one that needs to be shouted and echoed all across the world. It's time to make mistakes. So the three big funding structures that were discussed over the Hydrogen Summit and with us Australians was the Inflation Reduction Act in America, this patchwork structure of funding that the Europeans have, and the Hydrogen HEADSTART program. So some really quick quotes about the three of these is the IRA is a game changer. 3 years ago, they wouldn't have even been close to starting a project in the US. The IRA is simple, build it and they will come. Europe is doing various patchworks of money. So we need to be faster than the US to make up for the simplicity of the IRA. And regarding the Head Start, the quote was only 2 billion. So if we kick off with the IRA, it was the hottest topic of conversation at the summit. America was praised for their foresight, simplicity, and initiative. For those who aren't aware, the Inflation Reduction Act provides government incentives and investment in domestic clean energy initiatives. There's multiple funding structures under it, with the most notable being the Clean Hydrogen Production Tax Credit, which is a tax credit on producing hydrogen based on how carbon intensive you can make it. So where hydrogen's costing about $9 to $11 a kilo, this tax incentive is incredibly rewarding in creating those initial business cases for selling hydrogen. Secondly, the Advanced Energy Project Credit, which is a 30% investment tax credit, and it creates funding for manufacturing projects producing fuel cell electric vehicles or hydrogen infrastructure and electrolyzers. So my immediate thought with that is like, well, you know, where do you want to be building your hydrogen electrolyzers? Maybe America's a really good option if you're getting 30% off the total cost. A third one, which was interesting, was just the clean vehicle credit, which was individuals get $7,500 off the purchase of their fuel cell electric vehicles. Considering I don't even think we as individuals can buy these type of vehicles in Australia yet, this was really fascinating. The Europeans were very sad about their funding structure, and they were a little bit angry when they got up on the stage about how hard it was to get funding in Europe. So they typically have a funding structure focused on CapEx for project funding. It's aimed at getting projects off the ground and built. But these projects had to find customers willing to purchase their hydrogen. It's only recently that the EU Innovation Fund has announced IRA similar funding, and the winners will receive a fixed premium for each kilogram of renewable hydrogen that they produce over a period of 10 years. But this is only new news and was not the case when we were at the summit. So the European project developers were openly and incredibly jealous of the increase in projects reaching FID that was coming out of America. So where is Australia and where can we sit on all of this? So Caitlin mentioned our boat tour before, but the four of us were actually on a boat in the middle of the Rotterdam port with the federal, the South Australian and New South Wales governments when the budget got released. And we all found out about the $2 billion Hydrogen Head Start program on the boat in the middle of Rotterdam in the middle of the day. Although we were a little bit jet lagged, it was really interesting to hear about the government employees who had been working really, really hard to just try and get $2 billion. And then you turned to face the private sectors who they honestly just didn't think it was enough and they were a bit disappointed. So for those that don't know, the Hydrogen Head Start $2 billion is to make hydrogen from renewable energy or to make derivative products made from hydrogen, such as ammonia. And successful projects will have the opportunity to receive funding as a production credit that will cover the current commercial gap between the cost of hydrogen produced from renewables and its market price. Expressions of interest will be open in the first quarter of 2024. And following assessment, successful applicants will be awarded contracts and provided with ongoing payments over a 10-year period. This funding is only expected to support the delivery of at least maybe 2 large-scale hydrogen projects, though. An interesting part about the budget is that they were also releasing $2 million for early engagement with First Nations people on hydrogen. So correct me if I'm mistaken, Jen, but I think you're currently doing some research on funding structures that put First Nations people as equity shareholders in renewable energy projects. So that's really interesting. And while we were also in attendance, the Premier of South Australia got up on stage and announced the $600 million for the South Australian Hydrogen Jobs Plan, which was also very exciting news for anyone from Australia. So what we can learn from all of this is that the American IRA is potentially a huge threat to Australia, some of our supply chains. A lot of Asian customers are maybe going to be going to America for their hydrogen for now. Additionally, proponents who want to build electrolyzers, cars and equipment, they're getting incentivized to open business in America. And with some of these projects getting out of the ground fast over there, Australia might start losing its hydrogen potential. And we're actually probably more likely to start winning bids for mining, where we're sending all of our critical minerals overseas, where they're actually building the equipment and plants. So some final quotes from the panelists at the summit included, the IRA is big, blunt and quick. You can implement it in your business case immediately. EPC partnerships to scales that we've never seen before. Our procurement practices need to change, and we can compromise on cost, speed, but never safety. There is no other industry, except for maybe nuclear, that has an incident from 1937 hanging over its head. We can simply not afford to compromise on safety. Now going to pass over to Caitlin, who's going to take us through some of the cool technology at the summit.
Awesome, thanks for that, Karina. I just thought I would start with this slide to show on a global scale what the projects are looking like. So we've got that gigawatt scale production, which we all know about. And interestingly, there are a lot of mobility projects, particularly in Europe. I see hydrogen in mobility not as the highest demand, but I thought this number of projects was interesting. And you can see in Australia, we've got a large amount of gigawatt scale production there as well. So the IRA, they have a strategy for hydrogen to be 20% of the energy mix. And considering that to the fuel industry, it took the fuel industry 60 to 80 years to get to that 20% mix. So we've got a lot of technology development to occur, and policy and funding, as Karina touched on. We've got to roll that out and get this off the ground if we want it off the ground. So something interesting was focusing on the hard to abate sectors first, like shipping, aviation, and steel making. Or you can go the alternative route of going for the low hanging fruit. So I think you can learn from the easy, smaller scale projects and then apply that to the bigger scale. And then here's another quote, where there's a will, there's a way. This is an example of Uniper in 2020. Their response to the energy crisis was to construct an LNG terminal, and they did that in 6 months, which is pretty impressive. So when we need to make an effort and push for something, then it is possible, although it does seem crazy to do 60 to 80 years of development in just a decade or two. Next slide, please, Karina. So I'm apologising for this text-heavy slide. I just wanted to get all the challenges around electrolyzers on a page. There was lots of electrolyzer manufacturers at the conference, in the summit, and also in the exhibition hall. So it was good to just talk to them to hear what their challenges were. So yeah, the big focus is to bring down that cost curve. And there's going to be a first mover disadvantage with the first few customers coming through to the OEMs. And it was pretty funny because the OEMs were like, yeah, we need customers to really push this manufacturing capacity and upscale at the rate we need. And then the customers such as BP were like, oh, we need government support. we don't have the money. So it was a bit of pointing the finger. I also want to talk about project bottlenecks. So something interesting to me was the transformers have a long lead time, 1+ year, versus electrolyzers, which can be delivered in 6 months. In Europe, they also have not enough blue-collar workers for installation. And although, you know, these points here have a Europe focus, lessons learned can be applied in the Australian context. So we're most likely going to have these issues as well. There's also operational challenges. So there's been no long-term experience running electrolyzers at this scale. And although the OEMs claim certain manufacturing warranties and performance, it's based on testing for maybe a year, and we're not sure how that expands out to 10 years. An interesting solution that was shared was AI-powered cell voltage analysis that a company called R2 have developed in America. So I thought that was cool. Utilizing digitization and AI and applying that to these new hydrogen technologies is cool. And I also saw AI-powered control valves for the gas industry and all of that. So there was big discussions around AI throughout the conference as well. Next slide, please, Karina. This was an interesting one. So I went to a talk from GEXCON, which is a fire and explosion safety consultancy, and they shared some modelling videos of hydrogen leaks out of a plane that's being refueled. So this is liquid hydrogen at 5 bar. You can see this is just a leak during bunkering. The blue is the mole fraction in the air. So you can see that leak. And it immediately, in the rest of the video, it immediately dissipates the atmosphere. No one's harmed. It's obviously not the best thing to happen, but no one gets harmed. We do know that hydrogen has an auto-ignition risk. So if it does ignite, it's a whole other story, as you can see in the pictures on the right. So we've got a huge explosion and major damage. So for me, this just highlights that, you know, the aviation industry, it does have a strong safety culture, and we've seen them, that's how they've come to where they are, and we'll need to apply the same to the hydrogen industry. But these risks around hydrogen are a whole nother ball game. And also it shows that liquid hydrogen in planes might not be the best solution, and that's why sustainable aviation fuel is getting a lot more focus. There's projects popping up in Australia as well. So I think that's interesting and one to keep an eye on. Next slide, thanks. And then here I've just got some new technologies that were a bit exciting and stood out to me. So metal hydride storage is a good way to store hydrogen that's completely safe. And there's a startup in Perth called Carbon 280, which you might be familiar with, which are developing their own. The CEO, Mark, was there, and he happily was showing everyone around his canisters filled with metal hydride. And I think he was the only one at the conference who could safely say that he was holding hydrogen on him. And he was claiming that he could take it through customs and through security and border patrol, and it was no worries. And he was quite happy with that. But it was quite funny when Claire Jackson, who's a leader in the UK hydrogen industry, she was playing with his metal hydride, opened it up, and it spilt all over her backpack. And she was completely fine. She posted on LinkedIn, and he was pretty happy with the free advertising that he got through that. So although metal hydride storage is very expensive, it's one of the most expensive hydrogen storage options at the moment. It still is in early development, but you can see that inherent safety makes a big impact. So where do we prioritise safety versus cost? This was moving on to the ruthenium catalyst for ammonia cracking. This was just an interesting vendor that had a catalyst that could operate at much lower temperatures, which increases the thermal stability and efficiency of ammonia cracking. So I thought that was an interesting one. There's also Provaris, which is an Australian shipping company, and they've developed H2 Neo, a carrier ship, and also H2 Leo, a floating storage solution, which both have received approval from the American Bureau of Shipping. So they're progressing that. And I thought that was an interesting one. The ship has 2 large diameter cylindrical tanks, and it can operate up to 250 bar. So there's interesting technology coming out of Australia as well as the rest of Europe. And it was just great to see that all showcased and see what lessons we can learn and apply in an Australian context. With that, I might move on to Emelina.
Thank you. Thanks to you all. That was an excellent summary of the conference. So along with attending the conference, I was also fortunate enough to be able to visit the UK and meet with our AGIT sister company, Northern Gas Networks, and see some of the really cool hydrogen projects they have that they're all working with out there. So our first visit was Highgrove, which is a 100% hydrogen appliance demonstration home in the north of England. And that's been operational now for 2 years. And during that time, they've had so much interest. They've conducted tours for over 3,000 people, which include a range of stakeholders from government, industry, schools, education, and just the general community more broadly. There's a lot of interest in appliance demonstration. So at the home, they're showcasing a cooktop, a boiler, and a heater, and we were lucky to be able to sort of work those appliances as well. You can see there's a group of us out there, and it was very fortunate to be able to be taken through the home. So excitingly, Australian Gas Infrastructure Group recently launched Australia's first 100% hydrogen demonstration home in a suburb called Wollert in Victoria, just in outer suburbs of Victoria, which is demonstrating 100% hydrogen appliances with a beautiful Electrolux cooktop, a barbecue, instantaneous hot water, and also a ducted heating system as well. So if you're wanting to visit the home in Victoria, reach out and we'll be happy to facilitate a tour. But very fortunate to see Highgrove. If you want to jump to the next slide. Thank you. There are quite a few projects, as you can see, underway in the Lower Thornley village out here. The ones of note, though, are High Deploy. So this project was demonstrated to demonstrate 20% blending into the existing gas networks. And that was sort of to demonstrate that it can be done safely with public acceptance there as well. So there was 670 properties that took part in that project, and that sort of ran from August 2021 to June 2022. So that's been completed now. The next really cool project is the Customer Energy Village, and this is designed to represent sort of the 20+ million homes in the UK. So it consists of 9 homes in total, 3 1910 terrace homes, 2 1930 semi-detached homes, 1 1950s bungalow, 2 1970 flats, and 1 1990 semi-detached home. So they have taken the materials, they've sourced the materials to build those homes. They were complete replicas of what would have been built during those periods. And what they're doing is they're looking at the best way to decarbonise these styles of homes in the UK. So that includes natural gas, hydrogen networks, alongside electricity and water supplies as well. They're also looking at things like insulation, just the best way to heat those homes in such a cold climate. Next slide, please. We also were able to go out to Northumbrian's Howden wastewater treatment plant, which was something that I hadn't actually been to before, and the scale of this plant was actually huge. So there's 19 Northern Gas Networks bio connections in the UK, but there's over 100 across the UK. So they're recognising the importance of biogas as well. So Howden is one of the largest in the East Coast and treats water from around just over 1 million people or 1 million homes. So at that site, they create about 40,000 cubic metres of biogas per day, which is approximately just over 1% supply from biogas. They're looking at the future of the site there. They'd like to capture the CO2, but currently carbon capture is a little bit too expensive, but that's definitely a future use for that site as well. So from an Australian context, biomethane has been recognised as a short to medium term solution to help decarbonise our gas networks while we sort of develop hydrogen industry at scale across Australia. I'll jump to the next one. Thank you. Also a really cool project is the Red Car project. So that's been developed by Northern Gas Networks, and that'll see the entire town of Redcar, which is more than 2,000 homes, convert to either 100% hydrogen or electricity. So they've had a choice there. So out of the 2,000 homes, homes and schools and businesses within that community, only 30% of households have actually chosen to electrify. Everyone else is going with a hydrogen supply. So Northern Gas Networks have recognised the importance of community engagement, and they've done an excellent job of working with the community, and those will be a part of their project as well. So what we talk about a lot in Australia is you don't have an industry if you don't have key stakeholders who want your product. So community engagement is something that we really heavily rely on. We focus on as a business, but that's one of the sort of the key drivers for a lot of our projects. So we'll be keeping a keen eye on this project, as it could very well be the blueprint for how we deliver 100% hydrogen into the domestic gas networks in Australia. If you want to jump to the next slide, please. This sort of just gives you a bit of a project snapshot of actually what they're going to be doing at site there as well. So you can see there's above below ground storage. We've got electrolysers. We've got other electricity infrastructure as well. So really cool project. Yeah, like I said, we'll be keeping a close eye on that as well. So just wanted to, before we open to questions, just wanted to thank AGIT again on behalf of all of us. Such a wonderful opportunity. There was a lot of information shared, walked away with a brain full, but it was the most important thing was just really liaising with the Australian industry. Austrade had an excellent program that they ran there as well. So very fortunate to be involved. So thank you. And I'll open it up to questions.
Any questions from the floor? Okay, I have one. Probably this is one for all of you. What was the most surprising thing that you saw or heard while you were there?
I think from me, it was that we're all really just learning. So I feel like I'm relatively new to hydrogen, coming from electricity. So I feel like my learning curve's been steep. But being at the conference, I feel like there's a lot of people who are still just trying to understand and problem solve and find some solutions to some of the bigger challenges we have, not necessarily only in an Australian context, but our problems seem to be shared globally. So, which was also comforting, I guess, in a way. But yeah, it's really cool to be part of a new and emerging technology.
Nice.
For me, it was while we were over there in the Netherlands, and I think I probably had a bias that, the Netherlands is where everything hydrogen is happening, but we found out that currently their biggest operating electrolyser is only a 1 megawatt one, and Em's team in South Australia have a 1.25 megawatt one. So we were shouting up and down the conference that Australia had the bigger electrolyser.
Nice.
I can go next. And one of the biggest sort of findings, and I guess movement for me was like essentially just learning about the scale and the number of projects across Australia that are under development. So it was really good to have those chats and sort of know more about the different projects, like from different sort of around the spectrum. Research to like commercial export. So it was just a mind-boggling moment for me in terms of like just learning that there's so much infrastructure and development happening within the nation that we hear so less about.
And I guess I'm last. I'm going to say two things. So first thing that was really exciting was being around 11,000 people that were all passionate about hydrogen. In my office, we've got a big oil and gas background, so a lot of people aren't super convinced on hydrogen, and there's a medium moderate section of the company that works on hydrogen projects and has that inspiration. So it was keen, to be around that number of people, and I was like, oh wow, okay. It was really big moment. Another one, so as part of the summit talks, they had a lot of CEOs on the panels, and there was not many women at all on these panels. Someone made a joke that they were manels, not panels. So that was surprising to me, because I think in Australia we do a medium good to good job at that diversity split, but I didn't see that as much in this conference. And I had a lot of side conversations about the role of women and how we can encourage more women to leadership, and that work-life balance and that side of things. So yeah, it was interesting.
Thank you, everyone. Benji Lee.
Hello, and thanks, heaps for your presentations. It's awesome to sort of hear what's, was going on at the conference, and it brought back some memories of a trip to the World Gas Conference in 2015 that I was lucky enough to go on and hear about hydrogen and biomethane in the early days there. So thanks for delivering a great presentation and also bringing back a little bit of nostalgia for me. I guess, as a policy person, I'm quite, you mentioned and I know that there was a strong sort of government sort of part to the delegation, and, pointing out that US Inflation Reduction Act as, a real game changer and great timing for the conference, and with Australia's sort of revisiting its national hydrogen strategy. What was your sense around, how the government officials took on, the hydrogen head start not being enough? And, you mentioned that reaction, but yeah, what do you think they're sort of taking back into that review?
Did you have thoughts, or were you waiting for me?
I was waiting for you, actually, but I do have thoughts always. I think from a policy government sort of perspective, I think they've realised that they actually just really need to work pretty quickly to get sort of policy and get the act changed, get some policy and regulation behind this. It's really hard to develop some of these projects without a box to work within. So in South Australia, we're hopefully passing a bill soon on the Renewable Hydrogen and Electricity Act as well. So there has been a swift movement. I know it was happening in the background, but there's been a lot that's happened this year in that space as well. Karina, I don't know if you want to chat to the US
yeah,
inflation.
I'll just add. I'll just add that the Em's already mentioned it, but the South Australian bill was actually the only piece of formal legislation proposed throughout the entire summit by the Premier in South Australia. So it was heartwarming to be an Australian in the crowd going, oh, well, we're ahead in the policy space. And afterwards, a lot of people were coming over to the Australian stand saying, wow, you guys really have something there. So that was exciting. But a lot of the policy chats were linked into funding and making mistakes and all of that stuff. And someone kind of pointed out during one of the earlier on panels was that we just need to break the cycle of everyone looking at each other going, oh, you go first. Like, I don't want to go first. You go first. You tell the policy people what they need to do. And then I'll build the really easy cookie cutter facility that's going to make me all my money. But like Caitlin mentioned, with the scale up expected in the next 20 years, you can't be sitting around waiting for someone else to go first. So, I mean, if we can go first, that's awesome. Parul or Caitlin, did you have anything else to add to that? If not, Jordan, you might have something else to add.
Thanks for your response. That was great.
Yeah, if there was nothing else on that one, I would like to first apologise for the terrible contrast on my video right now. That's atrocious. Unfortunately, this is the best spot that I can find to sit, though. So, I echo Benji's sentiments. Is great to hear the feedback and the experience you guys had at that conference, and really glad that AGIT is able to support such opportunities. And I was glad that that Caitlin reflected on the diversity that we have in our industry. I was noticing as I was considering pulling a panel together of leaders in the renewable gases sector that I had trouble finding a male leader to add to my panel. So it is, I feel like it is something where it genuinely demonstrates that diversity leads the way for change. But I was going to ask, and actually I had the question, it really well jumps off the back of what Karina was saying there in the almost that chicken and egg conversation again, no matter what the size of the projects. But I remember back when I was involved in the APLNG, CSG LNG project, the way that they overcame that problem in that space was by vertically integrating between production and utilization. We're hearing many people starting to get on top of that opportunity in the discussions, or hadn't people quite got there to that point of vertical integration yet?
The European officials were really reflecting on vertical integration, saying that it's because they just are finding it so hard to get funding and it takes up to a year to actually get funding. They're saying that, yeah, they need ecosystems and to put all the jigsaw puzzles together, and everyone kind of needs to get that collaboration going and also absorb the risk as a larger group rather than, one big company absorbing the risk. So the European delegates were very focused on getting all the jigsaw pieces together rather than the chicken and the egg. But they were also sitting there very jealous of America, who didn't have the same puzzles that they had.
Yeah. It's funny. There's two options: solve the chicken and egg through vertical integration, or throw insane amounts of money at it. Where we don't have an economy where we can do the latter, I'm hoping we can do the former a bit, and hopefully that type of realization starts to dawn on the regulators around the world and in Australia, that we do need vertical integration isn't always a dirty word. It can actually be very powerful for getting new industries off the ground and market making before we have fluid markets to work with. But it's interesting to hear that that's the conversation going on there too. So thank you very much, and once again, great to hear all of the amazing stories. I'm very jealous that I wasn't there myself.
If there are no more questions from the floor, no more questions. Karina, Parul, Caitlin, and Emelina, thank you ever so much. You did a wonderful job. My learning curve is currently vertical in this space. As a person that travels for work overseas for the Australian gas industry, I'm always so pleasantly surprised at what the rest of the world thinks about our hydrogen industry. I'm always surprised how many people come up to me and want to talk to me about it, because they just say that we are leading it at every turn, and I agree 100%. So folks, thank you so much. That is another Lunchbox session down for AGIT. So put your hands together. Thanks, ladies. You did a wonderful job, and I will see everybody at the next Lunchbox session.
Thanks so much, Jen.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
so much,
Jenna.
Jen.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.